When I walked into the living room, everyone was already seated, and the room felt too still. My mom sat with her hands folded. My dad leaned forward like he had been waiting for this moment. Ada sat on the couch holding her newborn, and she did not even look at me. My heart beat faster as I asked, "What is going on?" My dad took a breath and said they had made a decision. Ada and the baby would move into my room. I would move into the tiny storage room beside the laundry area. I stared at him, thinking I must have heard wrong. My mom added that it was the only fair thing to do, since the baby needed space and peace. I felt my chest tighten as she spoke calmly, like this was all reasonable. I said softly that I needed time to think. But they both frowned. My mom said I was being selfish, and that love meant sacrifice. She added that if I really cared about my niece, I would prove it by moving out before the weekend. The room felt smaller and smaller as everyone looked at me, waiting for me to agree. I went upstairs slowly, trying not to cry. When I reached the hallway, I stopped. Baby things were already stacked outside my bedroom door. There were cans of soft paint, stencils of stars and clouds, folded blankets, and boxes marked nursery. Someone had even taped my room number on a box like it already belonged to the baby. My throat tightened. They had decided everything long ago. They just waited to tell me at the last minute. I opened my door and tried to begin packing, but the room felt strange, like it was no longer mine. I picked up an old box filled with ribbons and school drawings I made when I was younger. As I held it close, Ada walked in without knocking. She did not greet me. She just started measuring the walls, talking loudly to herself about crib sizes and where the rocking chair would go. She never looked at the things I was packing. It was like I had already vanished. I stood there holding my childhood box, and the truth hit me. Maybe this room was never really mine. Maybe I was always the extra one in the house. My dad showed me the storage room like he was giving me a tour of something nice. The room was tiny, barely big enough for the narrow camp bed pushed against the wall. There were cleaning supplies, dusty boxes, and no window at all. He said it was only temporary, but then he talked about adding shelves in the room to store even more things. When he left, I sat on the bed. It squeaked under me and felt like it might bend. I tried to tell myself it would be fine, but I knew it would not. That night, I lay awake in the dark and heard the baby crying in my old room. I could hear my parents laughing with Ada in the hallway, saying how the baby would sleep better now. I turned my face to the wall and whispered into my pillow. I was not weak. I was not selfish. But I also knew this could not be the end of the story. Something deep inside me said that this moment would change everything. I closed my eyes and promised myself I would not let this be the way my life stayed. The next weekend, relatives came to see the baby. I stayed in the kitchen most of the time, washing dishes to avoid the crowd. But I could still hear the voices from the living room. My mom spoke loudly, telling everyone how much they sacrificed to give Ada and the baby my room. People gasped and said how sweet and thoughtful that was. Then an aunt laughed and called me the spare, like it was a funny joke. Others chuckled. My face grew hot. When I tried to explain that I did not agree at first, my father cut me off. He said I had always been dramatic and ungrateful. Everyone nodded like it was a fact. I stepped back into the kitchen, shaking. As I picked up a tray, I heard Ada talking to her husband. She said Zara can move out if she cannot handle simple family changes. My chest hurt. It felt like no one wanted me here, except to be blamed when things went wrong. I pressed my hands to the counter and tried to breathe. The humiliation felt heavy, like it was sitting on my shoulders. I knew something was breaking inside me. That night, I lay awake again in the storage room, and old memories flooded back. I remembered birthdays where Ada got extra gifts because she was older. I remembered school trips she got money for while I was told to learn to manage. I remembered watching her get praised for every little thing while I was told to be independent. Later, I heard my parents talking in their room. Their voices were low, but the house was quiet, and every word floated down the hall. My father said, "We already used the money her grandfather left for her. She will be fine. She always is." My breath caught. "What money?" My mother said, "We will deal with the letter if it ever comes up. She does not need to know anything." The words hit me like a cold wind. What letter? Why were they hiding something from me? And why did it sound important? I stood in the dark hallway, shaking. It felt like the ground under my feet had cracked open. I knew then that the room switch was not the real secret in this house. There was something bigger, something meant for me, something they did not want me to find. The week after the visit, I felt like a ghost in my own house. The baby cried at night and I barely slept. My small room was hot and stuffy. By day, school started to feel harder. I stared at my notebooks and the words blurred. I missed homework, forgot small tasks, and my test scores began to slip. One afternoon, my homeroom teacher asked me to stay back. She spoke kindly but firmly and said my grades were dropping. She worried that my scholarship might be at risk if this continued. My stomach twisted. She said she would call my parents to talk. That evening, my parents called me into the living room. I thought they would be worried. Instead, my father accused me of using school as an excuse for attention. My mom said I just wanted sympathy because of the baby. In the middle of this, my father said in a sharp voice, "This house will always belong to Ada and her family one day, so you need to learn to adapt." His words echoed in my head, mixing with what I heard about money and a letter. A quiet fire lit inside me. I decided I had to find out exactly what they were hiding. A few days later, the chance came. Ada and the baby had a checkup at the clinic. My parents went along to help. The house was finally empty and silent. My heart raced as I climbed the stairs, but I did not stop at my floor. I went all the way up to the attic door. The attic smelled of dust and old wood. Light slipped in through a small crack in the roof. Boxes and trunks were stacked everywhere. I moved carefully, reading faded labels. Old clothes. Holiday decorations. Books. At the back, I saw a wooden chest filled with photo albums and my grandfather's military medals. Under a pile of yellow newspapers, I noticed a small tin box. It was dull silver, and on the lid was my name written in my grandfather's firm, careful handwriting. My hands shook as I picked it up. I felt something inside it slide and tap the metal. I knelt down and started to open the lid. Just then, the front door slammed downstairs. Voices floated up, sharp and close. My heart jumped into my throat. They were home. I hurried down the attic steps, clutching the tin box. I hoped to hide it in my room and pretend nothing had happened. But when I reached the hallway, my parents were already there. My mother saw the box at once and snatched it from my hands. Her face was tight and angry. She said it was just old junk and I was making a mess. My father stepped closer and told me the attic was off limits, especially when no adult was around. He said I had no business touching legal papers that I would not understand. I tried to argue, saying my name was on the box. My father ignored this and carried it to their bedroom. The door shut loudly. I stood alone in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. That night, I saw a strip of light under their bedroom door. I paused in the dark hallway and heard the faint sound of paper rustling. Then my father's low voice said, "If she finds that letter, we are finished." My mother's whisper replied, but I could not hear the words. I leaned against the wall, knowing the secret was bigger than I had ever imagined. The next day, everyone went out again for a short visit. Ada took the baby to see her in-laws. My parents went along. I pretended I had extra schoolwork and stayed home. The moment the gate clicked shut, I moved. I walked straight to their bedroom. My hands trembled as I opened the wardrobe. Clothes brushed my face as I pushed them aside. On the shelf, under a stack of folded shirts, I saw the tin box. They had hidden it there. I pulled it out and set it on the bed. This time I forced myself to breathe slowly. I opened the lid. Inside were folded deeds, old receipts, and some letters. At the very bottom, tucked flat against the metal, lay a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in the same firm handwriting from the lid. My chest tightened as I tore it open. A long letter slid out, along with a photocopy of a stamped legal document. I began to read. One line froze me in place. "Zara, I am leaving the house to you." Just then, I heard the front gate open and footsteps coming into the house. I grabbed the letter and the photocopy and ran to the bathroom. I locked the door and sat on the closed toilet seat, heart hammering. With shaking hands, I unfolded the papers again. The letter was from my grandfather. He wrote that he had watched our family for years. He saw how often I was overlooked and pushed to be strong on my own. He wrote that he loved Ada as well, but he worried I would be forgotten. So he made a decision. The family house, the one we all lived in, would belong to me once I turned 18. He said my parents were supposed to tell me after I finished high school. He also wrote about a fund meant for my education, managed by my parents until I was old enough. My eyes burned as I read. The photocopy showed a will with my name clearly listed as the owner of the house after him. Nothing in it mentioned Ada or her baby taking my room. I stared at the tiled wall and whispered, "So whose house is this now?" For the first time, I did not feel like a spare. I felt like someone who had been written into the center of the story. I walked into the bank the next afternoon with the letter in my school bag. My hands felt cold as I waited for the clerk. When my turn came, I gave her the account name and number written in my grandfather's letter. She typed for a long time, then her face changed. She looked at me with careful eyes and asked for my ID. After checking it, she sighed softly. She told me the account had been closed years ago by my legal guardians. At that time, I was still a minor, so my parents had full control. She turned her screen a little, and I saw the dates. My stomach dropped. The account closed during the same month Ada bought her first car. I remembered that shiny silver car, how everyone praised her. My dad said she deserved it. I also remembered her wedding, so beautiful and expensive. I always wondered how they afforded everything. The clerk leaned closer and whispered that the remaining balance had been withdrawn completely. She was sorry, but there was nothing else she could tell me. I thanked her and walked outside. The sunlight felt harsh. I stood on the sidewalk, numb and shaking. My grandfather saved that money for my future, and they used it for Ada's life. When I got home, anger and hurt mixed inside me. I went to the living room where my parents were watching a show. I stood in front of them and told them what I learned. I said the account was closed without my knowledge. I asked why. My mother frowned and said I was confused. She claimed I must have misread something. She said I was jealous of Ada and the baby. My father cut in and said the letter was old and did not matter anymore. He said the lawyer changed things later, but he refused to show proof. I tried to stay calm. I asked again about the money. My father raised his voice. He said they used it for things the family needed. He said I should stop acting like a victim and be grateful for what they gave me. While they spoke, I kept my phone hidden in my pocket. It was already recorded. Every word. Every excuse. Every slip. Later, in my tiny room, I listened to the recording. I heard my father say clearly, "We did what we had to do with her money." My heart ached, but I also felt stronger. Now I have proof. And I was not letting this go. The next day after school, I took a bus to find the lawyer whose name was in my grandfather's letter. His office was small and quiet, with dusty shelves and soft lighting. He looked old but kind. When I introduced myself, his face softened with recognition. He said he remembered my grandfather very well. I told him everything. When I said my parents never told me about the will, he looked shocked. He pulled out a thick folder from his drawer. Inside were the original papers. He let me read them slowly. The will was clear. Nothing had been changed. The house was mine after I turned 18. My parents were only meant to manage the education fund, not spend it. His voice grew firm as he read the papers himself. He shook his head and said this was wrong. He asked if I wanted him to take action. My hands shook as I nodded. He said he would send a formal letter to my parents. He also made copies of all the documents and placed them in a folder for me. When I stepped outside, holding that folder tight, the air felt lighter. For the first time, I felt like I had real power in my hands. Back home, everyone talked excitedly about the big event coming up. Ada planned a baby dedication. It would also be a birthday celebration for our mom. Many relatives would attend. The house buzzed with plans and decorations, but I felt calm inside, like a storm waiting to rise. That night, I sat at my desk and spread out the papers. I made neat copies of my grandfather's letter and the will. I read his words again and again. Each line reminded me that someone once believed in me enough to give me everything he had left. The lawyer called to confirm that the registered letter to my parents would arrive the morning of the celebration. I thanked him. My voice did not shake this time. I walked upstairs and stopped in front of my old bedroom door. The walls were painted soft pink for the baby. Stars and clouds were stenciled above the crib. A toy mobile hung from the ceiling. I placed my hand on the doorframe and pictured myself taking the room back. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth. The time for being silent was over. The morning of the celebration came fast. Music played downstairs. Relatives laughed in the living room. Ada dressed the baby in soft white clothes. The whole house felt bright, but inside my chest, everything was steady and calm. Just after breakfast, the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood at the gate holding an official envelope. It had my parents' names written clearly on the front. He asked them to sign before handing it over. My parents opened it at the dining table. Their faces changed at once. My mother's smile faded. My father's hands shook slightly as he read the words from the lawyer. Ada stood nearby, confused. She asked what was going on. My mother snapped and told her to stay out of it. I stepped closer and held my own copy of the letter against my chest. My voice felt strong when I spoke. Actually, I said, this is very much my business. The room fell silent. Even the baby seemed to quiet down. My parents looked at me with fear, confusion, and anger all mixed together. And I knew the real battle had just begun. The house filled with people soon after. Relatives carried trays. Friends came to greet Ada and the baby. Laughter floated through the rooms, but my parents looked tense. They kept glancing at me like they were waiting for me to make a scene. I stayed calm. I waited for the right moment. When everyone settled in the living room for speeches, I stood up and asked politely if I could speak. My father tried to interrupt. My mother tried to wave me off. But the guests were already curious, so they asked them to let me talk. I began slowly. I told the story from the beginning. I spoke about losing my room. I spoke about hearing them talk about money. I told them about the attic and the tin box. Then I explained how I found the letter from my grandfather. I held it up for everyone to see. Gasps spread across the room when I read the part that said the house was meant for me. Ada's husband stared at the walls like he was seeing everything in a new way. His mother covered her mouth. My parents tried to shout over me, but no one listened to them. For the first time, all eyes were on the truth. My father stepped forward and said I was lying. He called it a misunderstanding. But the room was not on his side. An uncle raised his voice and asked directly if they used my education fund. My father's face turned pale. He tried to explain that the money had been used for family needs. He said priorities changed. Ada looked stunned. She whispered to her husband, and I saw the color drain from his face. He asked my parents if he and Ada had been living in a house that did not belong to them. My mother snapped at him, telling him not to act foolish. But her voice shook. I held up the bank papers and read the dates. The room grew heavy with silence. My mother began crying, saying I wanted to destroy the family. I looked at her and said softly, "No, I am refusing to be erased." Ada stepped back, holding her baby tight. Her eyes filled with worry and guilt. Relatives murmured that this was too much. Some glared at my parents. Others shook their heads, offended by the lies and secrets. For once, I did not feel small. I felt seen, and they knew it. After everyone left in shocked silence, the house felt cold. My parents sat in the living room, whispering angrily to each other. Ada stood near the stairs with her baby. She looked tired and afraid. I walked past all of them without saying a word. When I reached my old room, I opened the door and stepped inside. The soft paint, the stencils, the toys, the crib, all of it filled my eyes. It felt strange to see my space changed for someone else. I reached up and began taking down the hanging mobile. Ada rushed in. She asked what I was doing. Her voice cracked. I told her plainly that I was taking back my room. She argued that the baby needed it, but her voice shook too much to sound sure. I told her she could stay in the room if she wanted, but if she did, she would be staying as my guest. Not as the owner. Not as the one who replaced me. Ada stared at me for a long moment. Then she whispered that she never asked for any of this. She looked down at the baby and walked out quietly. I kept taking down the decorations. It felt like reclaiming my breath. That night, my father cornered me in the hallway. His face was tight with anger. He said if I kept pushing this matter, he would throw me out. I looked at him without fear. I told him that the house was legally mine and that the lawyer confirmed everything. I said that any attempt to remove me would only make things worse for him. My mother came to his side and begged him to calm down. But he glared at me like he did not recognize me. I stayed still. I refused to shrink. I told him we needed to talk with the lawyer. We needed to make a real agreement. He tried to shout again, but his voice cracked. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger. Fear. I went to my reclaimed room and lay on the bed. The paint smelled soft and sweet, but the air felt new. I placed my grandfather's letter under my pillow. It felt safe there, like a shield. As I closed my eyes, I knew something had changed forever. They could no longer push me aside. They could no longer pretend I did not matter. The house finally felt like mine. The next morning, Ada's husband spoke with my parents in the living room. His voice was low but firm. He said they needed to move out. He did not want his child growing up in a house with legal trouble. His mother agreed, though she looked embarrassed and angry about it. Ada cried as she packed the baby's clothes. She kept wiping her eyes and shaking her head. She finally looked at me and whispered that she never meant to take anything from me. She said she was confused and scared. She said she just wanted to be a good mother. I helped her fold a few blankets without saying much. She watched me closely, maybe waiting for me to throw it in her face. But I did not. I simply said they needed a new start, far from all this mess. As they carried boxes to the car, the house felt lighter. The air felt different. My parents watched from the doorway, silent and tense. They did not know what to say. I walked upstairs to my room and opened the windows wide. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. A few days later, the lawyer came to our house for a meeting. My parents looked nervous as we all sat at the dining table. The lawyer placed the documents on the table and spoke clearly. He explained my rights. He explained their duty. He explained the laws they had ignored. My parents tried to argue at first, but the lawyer did not bend. He said the will had full legal power. He said the money taken from my education fund was serious. He also said that I had the right to press charges if I wished. I looked at my parents. Their shoulders were low, and they refused to meet my eyes. I told them I was not trying to break the family. I just wanted fairness. Then I told them my conditions. First, they had to sign a written statement that the house belonged to me. Second, they had to repay part of the education money into a new account under my name. Third, they had to write a real apology. My mother cried softly. My father looked trapped. He picked up the pen slowly, like it weighed 100 pounds. And then he signed. At that moment, I felt something inside me settle for the first time. The next day, my parents handed me the written apology. The paper shook a little in my mother's hands. I took it quietly and went to my room to read it alone. The letter was short and stiff, but one line struck me deeply. It said, "We chose convenience over you, and that was wrong." I read that line again and again. My heart felt tight in my chest. It was not perfect. It did not erase the hurt. But it was true, and I needed that more than anything. I placed their letter beside my grandfather's letter on my desk. The two papers sat side by side like they were speaking to each other. One letter showed love. The other showed regret. Both were now part of my story. For the first time, I let myself cry without trying to hide it. Not because I felt weak, but because I finally felt seen. I folded both letters and placed them in a folder together. I knew they belonged in the same place. My life was changing, and I was no longer afraid of that change. That evening, Ada came to my room and closed the door behind her. She sat on the edge of my bed and looked down at her hands. For a long moment she said nothing. Then her voice softened. She said she wanted to confess something. She told me that our parents had always put pressure on her. They told her she had to succeed for everyone. They told her she deserved more because she was older. She said they used guilt on her the same way they used silence on me. Then she admitted something even harder to hear. She said she learned about the inheritance last year. She said our mother told her I did not need it because I was stronger and more independent. She believed them. She said she was scared to question anything because she wanted to hold on to her comfort. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she was sorry. Truly sorry. I sat there, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her completely. Part of me needed more time. So I told her the truth. I forgive you, I said, but healing will take time. She nodded, and we sat quietly together. Months passed, and life slowly settled into something calmer. Ada and her husband found a small apartment of their own. They visited sometimes, but the visits felt peaceful instead of tense. The baby grew bigger and smiled every time she saw me. It felt different now, softer and honest. My parents treated me with more respect, though the trust was still slowly rebuilding. They knocked before entering my room. They did not make decisions about my space without asking. Relatives who once laughed at me now greeted me with new eyes. Everyone knew the truth. Everyone knew I was not the extra child. I turned my room into something beautiful. A study desk near the window. A quiet reading corner. A soft bed with clean sheets. My grandfather would have been proud. I also began tutoring younger kids from the neighborhood. I saved every bit of money I earned. I liked knowing I was building a future on my own terms this time, just like my grandfather wanted. The house no longer felt like a place I was forced to survive in. It felt like a place I could grow in, and for the first time, I felt truly at home. One quiet night, I sat on my bed with a notebook and began writing the whole story. I wrote about losing my room. I wrote about the lies and the secret money. I wrote about the attic, the tin box, the will, and the truth that changed everything. I wrote about the courage I never knew I had until I needed it most. As I wrote, I imagined strangers reading it someday. People who felt small. People who felt ignored. People who felt pushed aside. I wanted them to know they were not alone. When I finished writing, I folded my grandfather's letter and slipped it back under my pillow. It felt warm and safe there, like it always had. I touched the edge of the paper and smiled. The house was mine now. My space was mine. My voice was mine. I no longer needed permission to take up space in my own life. I looked around my room and felt a calm joy rise inside me. My story was no longer a quiet hurt hidden in the shadows. It was proof of strength. And now, it belonged to me.